Did we have a media investigation as to why traffic was so bad today?
Judge, we all made it here.
I assume it was a great day to pave. Ron Rubber, State of Indiana versus Lacey under 49-32-2301F1-002-213. Defendant's present person by counsel, state by deputy prosecutors. We're in second day of bench trial. We adjourned for the evening last night. We are still in the state's case in chief. State, you have additional evidence you wish the board to consider?
Yes.
Let me call your next.
State will call Detective Jamie Davis.
Promise what you're about to tell the court to be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, under pain and penalty of perjury.
I do.
All right, please have a seat. Once you're comfortable, can you tell me who you are and how you spell your name for our record?
Detective Jamie Davis, Jamie Davis.
Thank you, Judge. Detective Davis, let's just clarify, when this case happened, were you Detective Hadley?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you have since changed your name?
Yes.
Okay. How are you employed?
I am a child abuse detective with Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department.
How long have you been with IMPD?
I have been with IMPD since June of 2014.
And what kind of training did you go through to be an IMPD officer?
I've gone through, so I started off as a gaming agent, so I went through ILEA's Game Commission Academy back in 2007, and then I transferred to Shelbyville Police Department, went through ILEA's Basic Academy back in 2009, and then from there I transferred from Shelbyville to here, and then went through lateral Indianapolis Academy for IMPD, and that was in 2014.
And prior to, so from 2014 to when you became a child abuse detective, were you just a patrol officer at that point?
Yes, ma'am.
And what area did you work?
I started off at East District, and then I moved downtown before coming into the child abuse unit.
Okay. Did you do any civic training when you came to the child abuse unit?
Yes, I went through a training period with a detective training officer. That's generally 40 days, and then you're on probation. I believe it's a year from the day you go into the unit.
Have you done any specific schools or training as a part of your detective training as well?
I have. I've gone through the homicide and major crime school in 2022, and then I also have gone through, back in 2007, I went through a Reed School of Interrogation and Interviewing as part of the Gaming Commission's Academy. And then I've also gone through the Stan Walters Interrogation and Interviewing School in 2023. I went through Child First, which is for forensic interviewers, in 2023. And then I also went through Child Homicides and Death Investigation School at Franklin PD in 2023.
I'm going to draw your attention to Monday, August 29th of 2022. Were you working in your capacity as a child abuse detective on that day?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you on call on that day?
I honestly don't remember if I was on call. When you're in DT, we call it DTO, when you're in detective training, even if runs come out as if you were on call, you would typically take it.
Okay. Did you respond to a child fatality on that day at Burton Avenue?
Yes, ma'am.
How were you notified of that case?
A street officer that was working, Officer Harvey, requested a child abuse detective call.
Okay. And did you respond to the scene at that time?
Not at that time. I called the detective first and then gathered information. Another officer or another detective in the unit applied for a search warrant for the residence, which was granted, and I headed to the residence at that time.
Okay. When you got to the house, who did you speak with?
I spoke with the officer again when I got to the house, and then I went in and introduced myself to Daisha.
Okay. Can you describe her demeanor in your first interaction with her?
Initially, she was just very quiet. She says I went in to introduce myself, and she just started talking about how she thought she knew what happened, and I went ahead and just turned on my recording and, broke things down again, introduced myself, got all of her information, all of the children's information, then had her start going through what she was meaning when I first walked in. I just know it was just real quiet and soft. I didn't really think too much at first about it. It was more the odd statement of her kids. She thought her kids did something.
Okay. And at some point, you had a training officer with you. Is that Detective Hope?
Yes, ma'am.
At some point, did he tell you, hey, wait for everybody to get here?
Yes, he did.
Okay. So you didn't get kind of a full statement then?
No, ma'am.
You waited for the coroners and whatnot?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And was this your first death investigation that you were lead on?
Yes, ma'am.
Had you been out on other death investigations?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you said her demeanor was quiet. That initial kind of encounter with a parent, how much stock do you put into that demeanor?
I really don't put a lot of stock initially in anyone's emotions during any of these types of investigations. Part of the homicide major schools was trauma training, trauma informed, and everybody experiences trauma differently. So it's just something that, you just know, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Okay. What kind of did you do after you kind of introduced yourself to Deja and explained the process? How did things kind of unfold going forward?
So I stepped out, waited for the coroners to get there, and then once everybody arrived, coroners, DCS, we went ahead and took a statement from Daisha. It was led by the coroner. That, again, I recorded. During that statement, our crime lab had also arrived, and I stepped away for a minute, gave my recorder to Detective Hoke so that he could stay present and I wouldn't miss anything and go back and listen. And I kind of walked them through what I wanted done at the residence.
Okay. And we'll get back to the walkthrough in a minute, but you said the initial kind of statement there was led by the coroner. Was he going through that SUDI form that we've kind of talked about a lot?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So that's directing his questioning and the process that you go through on the scene?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you said you directed crime lab. What did you want crime lab to do in this case?
Daisha had mentioned a couple of different things on how she had found Alana. She had mentioned a blanket being over Alana at one point. She had mentioned pillows being over Alana at one point. Wasn't sure if either one was going to be relevant or not, so I just asked crime lab to collect those. I asked crime lab to take video, of course, of the entire residence and to take photographs.
And it was a fairly small residence, so there pretty much kid stuff everywhere?
Yeah.
Okay. And at that point, again, you weren't sure what was relevant, so you wanted everything?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Was anything else really happening that day besides that basic scene investigation that we've talked so much about?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Going forward, kind of what started happening in your investigation?
So the next day, myself and DCS attended the autopsy of Alana. It had been scheduled for 10:30. They were running a little behind, and unfortunately I had another appointment outside of this case that I had to leave the autopsy early, but I know DCS stayed for the whole thing. And then the following day, I believe it was 29th, 30th, the 31st.
And if you need to refer to your notes at any point, you can just let us know that's what you're doing.
Okay.
You can refresh your memory if you need to.
The 31st, I received paperwork from DCS. They're called 310s and 311s. It's basically the reports that DCS has. And then after that, I believe it's September 1st, and I'll just double check fast. Yes. September 1st, I was notified that all of the photos that Crime Lab had taken were uploaded to the system, and then later that day I had received another email from a DCS worker stating that Alana's sister Grace, I'm not sure which to call her, but she had made a statement that was concerning.
Okay. So when you got notified about Grace's statement, what did you kind of do next as a result of that notification?
So according to the FCM that had emailed me, Natalie Scheffler, Jen Armstrong was involved in informing her of this. So I notified Jen and asked her to come into my office that day if she could, so that I can find out from her what was going on and what was said.
Okay. Were you able to interview Jennifer Armstrong that day?
Yes, ma'am.
And then were you able to see the video that she had taken of her?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that the video that we watched in court yesterday?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. After interviewing Jennifer, then did you schedule a forensic interview for Grace?
Yes, a forensic interview was scheduled. I believe it ended up being scheduled for September 7th.
And why did you schedule a forensic interview of Grace?
So it's important when you're getting statements from children to make sure that that child's best interest is in place, and they're trained child forensic interviewers that will do just that. So it creates a safe environment for them to feel free to talk about whatever they want to talk about, and to give them that kind of space, be able to feel open enough to disclose any information that they might have.
And at that point, you had not gone through the 40-hour training that a forensic interviewer does, but you since have, is that correct?
Correct.
And forensic interviews are a pretty big part of what you do, is that fair to say?
Yes.
And you've watched plenty of forensic interviews.
Yes.
Are they meant to be non-leading in fashion?
Yes.
Do children always disclose in an interview, even if they've
No, ma'am.
disclosed previously? Okay. After that interview, did Grace make any disclosure about what happened with Alana in her interview?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Did you receive any other information from DCS going forward about Tasha's case?
Yes. At some sorry.
Oh, you're fine. What was that?
At some point, I had requested from DCS FCM Kirsten Bryant any notes that she may have had, and I knew that they had taken an initial drug screen on scene that day. I asked her if she ever had the results of those, and I was able to obtain those as well.
Okay. And we kind of already heard about that, but Tasha did test positive for methamphetamine and amphetamine that day, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So at this point, you have not done a formal interview of Tasha Lacey or an interrogation, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But as the investigation has evolved, you've gotten some other pieces of information that
Yes.
you were wanting to confront her with. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is there a final piece of information that you kind of wanted to have before you formally interrogated her?
The autopsy
Okay.
report.
And why was it important to you to kind of have all that information prior to bringing her in?
I wanted to know as much as possible before bringing her in. It kind of helps me determine how to address all of the inconsistencies throughout the investigation and how to move forward.
Okay. Did you finally receive the autopsy report?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you discuss the findings with the pathologist prior, like after you got the report, just to kind of clarify some things for yourself?
I know I talked to her after the statement from Grace.
Okay.
And I was asking her questions regarding rigor mortis and hyper mortis, and she sent me some information on it to help me understand how all of that works. And then I also, if you don't mind, I'd like to refer to my notes.
You may.
Oh, yes, sorry. I also asked her about smothering, if there's any signs and things of that nature, what to look for, if there's anything that she would be able to tell from an autopsy regarding that.
Okay. Before we get to Dacia's interview, I do want to just go through a couple things from the scene and the places that you were specifically looking at. So I'm going to, may I approach the witness?
Sure.
And defense has already looked through these this morning. I'm going to show you what's been marked for purposes of identification as 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. Do you recognize those photos? You can look through all of them. Take your time.
Yes, ma'am.
And are those photos true and accurate from your scene investigation at the Burton Avenue address, this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Judge, at this time, I would move 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 in evidence.
No objection. We should have stayed 7 through and including 10, 12 through and including 16 admitted without objection.
And I'm going to just show them on the All right, Detective Davis, State's Exhibit 7 is just the outside of the house that you responded to, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. State's Exhibit 8, this is the swing that was in the front room, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And why was that relevant to you? Was that a part of some of her initial discussion of what happened that night?
Yes, ma'am, it was.
Okay. And then State's Exhibit 9, is that how everything was when you got there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So there on the couch is Alana, covered up with a blanket. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then State's Exhibit 10 is Alana on scene that day. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
In State's Exhibit 12, this is that couch, but just the couch after she was removed.
Correct.
And is that from, so after Alana was taken away, would that have been like when you guys were doing the reenactment and whatnot?
I believe so,
How it
yes.
looked? Okay. Now State's Exhibit 13 and 13, 15, and 16, is this the bedroom where Dacia and the baby were supposed to be sleeping?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so there's an adult bed and there is a pack and play, but I think Kirsten Bryant has already described that it was full of items. And State's 15 is just another view of that, is that correct?
Correct.
Same room. And State 16 is more focused on the pack and play, is that correct?
It is, yes.
And then State's 14 is that the children's room where the other 2 minor children were sleeping.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And why, obviously the area where Alana was is relevant. Why are the bedrooms and the sleeping arrangements relevant to your investigation?
It shows us a layout of the residence and the house and how everything was, and it could be relevant depending on the statements that were given during the investigation.
Okay. And so the swing that we saw, that would not be considered a safe place for an infant to sleep?
Correct.
And the couch that we saw would not be considered a safe place for the infant to sleep?
Correct.
And obviously pack and play that was full of things would not be a safe place for the infant to sleep?
That's correct.
And it was also not safe for an infant to be sleeping in bed with the mother?
Mumbling.
What was?
You're mumbling.
Sorry. The bed that the mother was sleeping in would also not be a safe place for the infant. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So that was your scene investigation, and then that's where you'd gotten this other information. Do you finally bring Daisha in for an interview once you got the autopsy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And was she advised of her rights prior to giving you an interview?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. I'm going to show you what's been marked for purposes of identification as State's Exhibit 17.
No.
Do you recognize State's Exhibit 17?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is that?
It's the advice of rights form that we go through with anybody that we bring in who's a potential suspect.
And do you go through that in the written form and verbally with her?
Yes, ma'am.
And did she state she understood and signed that and agree to speak with you?
Yes, ma'am.
At this time, I would move State's 17 into evidence.
No. Show 17 admitted without objection.
And I'm also going to show you State's 18. Do you recognize this recording?
Yes, ma'am.
And how do you recognize it?
It's the audio or video recording of the statement during the interview that I took on the follow-up interview. Apologize.
Okay. And that's the video recorded interview on January 18th of 2023?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And have you reviewed that disc prior to today?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that a accurate representation of your interview with Daisha on that day?
Yes, ma'am.
Judge, at this time, I would move State's 18 into evidence.
No objection. Show 18 admitted without objection.
And by agreement of the parties, the court is going to watch that at a later time. So I will just move.
This is the 3-hour tape.
Yes.
Okay.
I will just move on. Ultimately, at the end of that interview, well, Daisha made statements to you about a different version of events. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what specifically did she tell you happened kind of ultimately?
Ultimately,
At the end, by the end of it, she did tell you a couple versions in that interview. Is that fair?
yes.
What is the final version that she told you?
The final version was that basically she was high on what she took that she believed was called, it was a rolling pill. That's how I was referred to it, but she believed it was Molly.
And what is Molly?
Oh, I apologize. Molly is a drug that kind of gives you, it's an upper in a sense, but it kind of gives you this relax, like everybody knows it as a love drug or something along that line. That's the best way I can describe it. But it's an illegal substance that individuals take to relax.
Okay.
And
Would it be consistent with like MDMA or ecstasy?
yes.
Is that what we're talking about? Okay.
Sorry.
That's
yes.
okay. So she told you she was high and what?
So basically she said that she was high and she was tired and Alana had been crying, and ultimately she ended up picking up Alana and facing her towards the crease in the couch. So if you have the back of the couch and then the seating area, she placed her right here face towards the crease.
And once she kind of made those statements to you, did you arrest her at that time?
I spoke with a prosecutor about everything, and then, yes, ultimately I arrested her.
Okay. So after her interview that day, Did you get any additional search warrants as a part of your investigation?
I did. She had a couple of phones on her. I do not believe either of these were the phones that she had at my initial investigation back in 2022. However, we still collected those, applied for a search warrant to search those phones, and try to find any information that we could relevant to the investigation.
So you got a digital forensics return
Yes, ma'am.
on the phone, her phone data, but none of that was directly pertinent to your investigation.
Correct.
And at this point, a period of about 4 or 5 months had passed, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I can just have 1 second, Judge. During Daisha's statement, she was, you were consoling her, is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And she was crying.
Yes, ma'am.
She was making statements to you as you were kind of comforting to her.
Yes, ma'am.
Are any of those statements things that you heard that are hard to hear on the video?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you tell me about those?
Yes, ma'am. She was actually sitting on my lap and crying in my shoulder, and had said that she did her baby wrong and said that she smothered her baby. I can refer to my PC for the exact statement, but
Okay, go ahead.
she said that she just needed sleep and that she smothered her baby, and she should have never did Alana that way. She should have never turned Alana around.
Have any other questions at this time?
And I assume you're reserving the right to have additional questions after the court reviews 18.
Yes.
Would your defense wish to cross as to this part of the witness's testimony?
Yes, Judge.
You may.
Detective, you have been in the child abuse unit since July of 2022,
Yes, sir.
and this came towards the end of August of 2022.
Yes, sir.
And at that time, you were still supervised by a training officer, is that correct?
That is correct.
And the officer was with you on scene that day. That day, 8/29/22.
Yes, he was on scene with me. I apologize.
And this was your first child death investigation, is that correct?
As lead detective, yes.
Well, you were not lead detective before as far as the child abuse unit, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so this would have been your first case as lead detective in the child.
Yes.
Okay. Were you lead detective in any other type of investigation other than children death investigation before?
Other than, I'm sorry.
Child death investigation.
Yes, sir.
And that would have been in crimes not related to children at all.
No, sir.
Okay. Then what were you investigating before?
All I investigate as a child abuse detective is crimes against children. So we investigate physical abuse, we investigate sexual abuse, and we investigate death investigations of children, and we also investigate neglect cases such as overdoses or unsafe living conditions, things of that nature.
So between July, when you started in the child abuse unit, July of 2022 to August 29, you have been lead detective in other cases, or you were still in training?
So it's I see what you're saying. I'll try to explain it so it's better to understand. I would get assigned my own cases, and Detective Hoke would get assigned his own cases. As I worked through my cases, Detective Hoke was my person to go to and to ask questions. Where did I go next? What did I do next? That type of thing. So yes, I was lead in multiple investigations. However, I was still being trained and guided throughout those investigations.
But before that case, there hasn't been just any other child deaths prior to this.
I was not lead on any other child deaths.
Okay. Now moving on. When you first walked into that scene, you immediately were thinking of unsafe sleeping conditions. That's right.
Yes, sir.
And you interviewed Deja on scene that day.
Yes, sir.
It was a short interview,
Yes, sir.
about 7 minutes.
Roughly.
There was a little bit longer interview that happened with the DCS investigator.
The coroner.
Coroner.
Yes, it was the coroner, DCS, and myself all present,
And that was about 39 minutes or so.
roughly.
And he was talking, mostly asking questions about standard of care questions in general about children and how she does things with children. Is that fair?
Correct, as the form is used during those child death investigations typically.
So, you did say something today about her giving multiple stories. The multiple stories then would have happened in the January interview. Is that right?
No, sir.
So she gave multiple stories on the 7 minutes that you did on 829? 7 minutes of interview?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay. So you have interviewed Deja Lacey 2 times. Is that correct?
No, sir.
So you have
Well,
interviewed Deja
2 times that day or 2 times in general.
You interviewed her for 7 minutes on 8/29/22, and then you interviewed her for 3 hours on
Yes, sir.
January 23.
Yes, sir.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay, so 2 interviews.
Yes, sir.
All right. So the multiple stories that she gave you were in both interviews, is what you're saying, or all in the 3-hour interview?
There was combinations between the statements I took from the officer and what he was told,
Okay.
between what she said during the coroner interview, which I was present for, as well as my short 7-minute interview, and then again during the 3-hour interview.
All right. And we agreed that the coroner investigator was focusing on standard of care, SUDI information, yes or no type question, 4 that he went through. Is that right?
Part of that is how you found the baby. Part of that is part of my investigation as well.
Okay. Now, on 8/29, 29/22, you were talking or present while Deja was talking for about 45 minutes between the 2 times, between the 2 interviews.
For most of that, yes, sir.
You did not notice her being high, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. No falling asleep, slurred speech, anything like that.
She was just really soft-spoken. That was the biggest thing that I noticed. And again, like I said, through trauma training, I didn't take too big of a stock in that.
You did not document or notice her being high, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you discussed during that interview with her, on that day, the day you reported to the scene, there was this conversation about putting Alana to bed around 2 a.m. Is that correct?
With she and I
Yes.
would have to refer back.
You can
Okay.
refresh your
Thank you.
recollection. Also, if you have a copy of the probable cause affidavit, you may want to check that.
There was a lot of detail, so I just want to make sure I'm correct.
And that's fine.
Yes, sir, but I believe this looks like this was during the coroner's statement.
Okay, so there was a conversation about putting Alana to sleep around 2 a.m.
1 to 2 a.m.
Okay, and that's in putting her to sleep. This is also when the dropping the bottle to her mouth was discussed.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, at the end of that day, 8/29/22, Deja Lacey was not charged with any crimes. And
Correct.
children, as we heard previously, were not removed from her case. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, I want to move on quickly to, we heard from David Lacey yesterday. You have not interviewed David Lacey, is that right?
That is correct. I spoke to him on scene, but I didn't interview him.
Okay. No recorded statement
No, sir.
from him. Okay. Now, we saw pictures here in court today that were taken. These pictures were taken on scene, but the child had already been removed, put on the floor by EMT, things like that.
Yes, sir.
That's right. In other words, this is not exactly how you, this is how you maybe this is how you imagine the child was, but you don't know for sure if that's how she really was or not.
That is correct. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Now, I'm gonna move on to the later stages of the investigation.
Okay.
Going forward, at some point, you learn about Grace state, that correct?
Yes, sir.
And at that point, you hadn't had the autopsy report yet.
That is correct.
So you talk to the doctor. Is that
Yes, sir.
And you tell the doctor about Grace's state. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And Grace was then interviewed by a forensic interviewer.
Yes, she was interviewed.
And as you testified today, those are trained people to get statements out of children.
Not in that term, but it's trained individuals to be able to provide a safe environment for children to feel comfortable to be able to talk about whatever they need to talk
Whatever
about.
traumatic events that
Yes.
they have witnessed.
Yes, sir.
And they are trained to make the children feel safe so they can say whatever it is that they saw or know.
Yes, sir.
And Grace did not repeat in that interview what she had said previously.
That is correct.
Okay. And specifically, you testified today that these interviews are done in a non-leading manner. Is that correct?
Correct.
I want to talk to you next about the reenactment video.
Okay.
You were there when it was done,
Yes, sir.
and Alana had just been removed from the scene when it happened.
Yes, sir.
We saw an individual in that video. Was that the DCS investigator in the reenactment video?
There were a few people in the video.
Specifically, there was a man dressed in like black.
No, sir. That was the coroner.
Okay.
Theodore Fears.
Yeah, that was him.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you were there, so was your training officer at the time?
Detective. Yes, sir.
Yes. Now, no other police or medical professionals were on scene during that reenactment video?
I'm not sure where the police officers were during the video, but we did have police on scene.
Okay. Now, you testified today that you were on a probation period for about a year.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that right? And you also testified today to a number of training courses that you have done in 2023.
Yeah.
Correct. Since you have done the interview with Deja in January, I believe it was January 18th of 2023, these training courses happened after that interview.
That is correct.
Okay. I want to talk to you about the I smothered my baby statement. At that point, detective, were you aware of other statements about I killed my baby outside the scene, outside the house, the day of the incident?
Are you referring to what Daisha's father said?
Correct.
I was not aware about that until yesterday in the courtroom.
Okay. Okay. You have never heard that before.
No, sir.
Right. Now, you testified today that she said in the 3-hour interview, I smothered my baby, but we will not be able to hear that. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, as a trained detective, in general, trained detective interviewee, when someone makes what appears to be a confession, you are trained to elaborate and get more on that. Is that correct?
I don't know that I understand your question.
When
I
someone
apologize.
makes what appears to you to be a confession, as a detective, you are trained to get them to elaborate, talk more about it.
Yes, yes.
Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
And you try to do that in this situation, is that right?
That is correct.
And that did not result in us hearing I smothered my baby again, is that right?
Right. She didn't say I smothered my baby again.
Okay. So the one time she said it, only you heard it and we can hear it, is that right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay. Even though when you try to get her to elaborate, she had just said it a minute or two earlier, is that right?
Yeah, I believe so, yes. If I'm understanding you correctly.
Detective, I want to talk to you about the crease of the couch
Yes, sir.
that you testified to today. And as we said, the couch obviously didn't change position. The couch was always in that position. Is that right?
That is correct.
And is it fair to say the crease of the couch would have been towards Alana's left side?
I don't know how Alana was initially found
Okay.
to be able to tell you.
In the pictures we saw, is it fair to say it was towards the crease, her left side? The crease was towards Alana's left side.
Correct, but she had already been moved.
Correct, and I understand.
Okay.
And in the reenactment video, the manner that Deja pointed or acted like she did with Alana also was, it was to her left side.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Deja.
You're welcome.
Redirect?
Thank you. Great. I just want to circle back to a couple things with that. So we'll start with just back to kind of the scene. You were asked about you walking or looking for unsafe sleep situations. Is that always what you do if it's an infant death? Is that always something that you have to investigate?
Can you rephrase your
Sure.
question?
It was a long question. If you are responding to an infant death, is unsafe sleep always something you're going to investigate regardless of the circumstances?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That was better, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And we had talked a little bit about kind of the drugs that Daisha thought she was taking or that she actually did take. Did you do some research on those drugs just so you understood?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And with meth, did you kind of learn that there was a come down period afterwards?
There is, yes.
And you talked to Daisha about that a lot in her interview, correct?
I did.
Okay. Now let's go to the forensic interview process. The purpose of a forensic interview is not to elicit a disclosure from a child. It's just to give them the space to disclose if they want to, correct?
That is correct.
So in fact, an interviewer is prohibited by protocol from asking them direct questions.
Yes, a child forensic interviewer, as a law enforcement officer and also a child forensic interviewer, I would typically have leeway. However, I wasn't a child child forensic interviewer at that time.
Sure. So the interviewer, that this is all they do, even if they know that the interview is about baby Alana, they can't go in there and be like, tell them about baby Alana.
Correct.
Okay. In your interview, we've kind of talked about, you hear her saying, I smothered her, and you did interview training prior to this interview in your other law enforcement training.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, some of your detective and child abuse training has come after this case, but you did have a foundation of interview school.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, when you're hearing her say smother, you are repeating it back to her. Is that correct?
Yes, throughout the follow-up I did.
Okay. And I have that you probably said that to her about 5 times. Did she then ever come back and say, no, that's not what I said?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And in fact, she acknowledged to you that she was aware of things like not putting infants on the couch, not putting blows around them, and things like that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And we've talked a lot about Alana's positioning. The only person that knows how Alana was found is Daisha Lacey, correct?
That is correct.
And Daisha Lacey has not told law enforcement, CS, or anyone a consistent story about how Alana was found.
That's correct.
Nothing further. Oh, Judge, I do have just omitted, I'll move State Exhibit 19 as a demonstrative, which is a transcript.
No objection.
All right, well, Sheriff states 19 admitted for demonstrative purposes with the understanding that 18 is the actual evidence. 19 is there simply to assist the court. As 18, any differences between 18 and 19, 18 is the actual evidence. Anything further, State? Further questions from the defense?
Yes, Judge.
Okay.
Detective, you have not been present during the forensic interview, is that correct?
I was present.
When Grace was the interviewer in the room, you were there?
Not in the room. I was watching it live on a screen.
Okay, but so you were
I
not,
apologize. I didn't understand what you meant by
you were not
present.
in the room, but you did watch it. That's really my point.
That is correct.
And in that interview, baby Alana was talked about, was mentioned by Grace, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Conversation was, she was discussed, Alana was discussed.
Yes, sir.
Grace just didn't say the things that allegedly she said to everyone else outside that room, is that right?
That's correct.
Because we did hear Jennifer yesterday testify to Grace saying this to the friends and family, someone at school or church, something like that, is that right?
Yes, sir.
She just didn't say it in the forensic interview.
That is correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Just briefly.
Okay.
Every forensic interview kind of starts with family dynamics, correct?
Yes, sir. Ma'am, sorry.
That's okay.
Nervous, sorry.
Then the interviewer can't ask anything about a specific day or event, correct?
Correct.
Nothing further.
Okay. In terms of my notes, tell me again, when did Grace do her forensic interview? What day?
I believe it was January 7th, but I can check my notes really fast. Or I'm sorry, not January.
It was Grace, not Daisha.
Did I say Daisha?
No, but my question is about
Oh,
Grace.
okay, yes, Grace. It was September 7th, 2022.
I believe you'd indicated that the pack and play was not a safe place for Alana to sleep, is that right?
Yes, sir. That pack and play had several items in it.
Right, so I'm clear, since in terms of my male lack of knowledge, we're looking at the item that states 15 and 16, correct? the blue rectangular object?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, was it unsafe because of the clutter that was inside? Or would it have been unsafe even if all the items contained within 15 and 16, or the pack and play? If it had been empty, would it have been in a safe place?
I honestly would have to see the bottom of the pack and play to know, because babies need to be on a harder surface, flat surface. Some pack and plays are different than others and are
Okay.
not safe.
But if it came from a manufacturer, generally you would have anticipated that it would have been a safe place, would it not? I
Potentially,
mean, you're not
yes.
saying pack and plays generally are unsafe
Potentially, like I said,
because of the lack of hard surface on the bottom?
yeah, and I've
Fair
had
enough.
other investigations where they were not safe.
Okay. But your primary determination for 15 and 16, I assume, was because of the clutter inside?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the bed itself would never have been a proper place, correct?
That is correct. You're referring to Dacia's
The
bed?
Dace's bed, right.
Yes.
A 2-month-old should never be sleeping with an adult.
That is
in an
correct.
adult bed.
That is correct.
You were asked whether or not on your initial investigation going to the scene that you didn't see any signs of the defendant being intoxicated or high at that time. That you noticed that she was soft-spoken. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Were you surprised when the tox results came back the way they did?
Not
Based on your observation of her?
Not really. The soft-spoken kind of makes a little more sense with someone coming off of meth, but I would have never have guessed she had meth on board that day.
I think those are all the questions I have prior to looking at the actual statement itself. Questions on the court's question statement?
No.
Defendant? Welcome,
And Judge, may we get a look at the pictures? Thank you. Detective, the rolling bill was taken that potentially that Friday before the Monday when you talked to the Friday or Saturday before the Monday when you talked to Dacia. Is that right?
That weekend, either between Friday and Sunday, from my understanding with the different statements I got.
Okay. Detective, I am going to show you State's Exhibit 14. That's, I believe, is another back and play. If the items that we see at the bottom of that were removed, would that make it a safe place to sleep then for infants?
I honestly wouldn't be able to answer that unless it was like right here and I could look at it and feel the bottom.
Okay. I
Sorry.
mean, there are items I think we can see in the picture. If we remove them and it's empty, would it be safe?
Again, I'm not able to answer that.
It's the same question I asked her, basically.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Okay.
sorry.
Depends on the quality and the hardness of the surface on the
Yes, sir.
bottom, what you don't know.
Which I don't know. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, further questions from the
No,
defense?
Judge, thank you.
Any state?
Yes, the pack and play that Mr. Mansour showed you, that was for Julius, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And it would not have been safe for Julius and Alana to be sleeping together at 1 and 2 months, is that correct?
That is correct.
Nothing for,
Nothing, Judge, on that, Judge.
So basically what you're saying, it's never safe to put two kids in the same pack and play.
That is correct.
Sleeping with them. Okay, very good. Anything else?
no, Judge.
No, Judge.
Okay. All right. At this point then, do we have any other evidence for the court to consider other than going through State's Exhibit 18 and 19?
No,
That's anything other than what I need to review at 18 and 19 at this time?
No, Judge.
Okay. And just for scheduling purposes, other than the detective, do you have any other witnesses after her?
I do not anticipate.
Okay, so the state would be anticipating resting at that point. Okay. All right. And have you actually timed 18? Just how long it is?
It is 3 hours. There are some timestamps that the court can skip. Like, I think there's 15 minutes at the beginning that you can kind of skip over, but
Does the defense agree?
Yes, Judge.
Tell me and I can skip over what?
so if you look at the transcript, there's a timestamp.
Okay.
And there's right here, it says 13:36, speaking while walking in the room. So you can start there. There's a couple places throughout where it says that, like, Detective Hadley leaves the room. Honestly, those are not for more than longer than 5 minutes, so it might not be worth skipping because then the video might not restart.
You want me to see the pauses? Or?
I do not want you to see the voltage. I don't, unless you want to, of course, but no.
All right. Well, either way, both sides agree it doesn't have, the pauses don't have evidentiary value.
That's correct.
Correct.
All right.
But I just, there's not, like, I know some interviews have like an hour of dead time in the middle. That is not this.
Okay. All right. Well, time is 10:20. I do have a 10:30 calendar. And I'm probably going to start pretty soon, right?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Started the tape. I do have, I will take lunch. And so there'll probably be an hour break then. What I will do is notify you when I've finished the tape. And from there, my assumption is that based on what you've told me before, both sides will have additional questions for the detective. Is that fair? Or not? Or have you already covered it?
We are done with the detective. Let's see, ask
Okay.
questions.
All right. All right. So my assumption is that when I'm done, when I come back, the state will have rested.
Yes.
Okay. And so does the defense intend to put on any evidence?
As of right now, no.
Okay. All right. So once I finish the tape, then I'll alert both sides. We can come back and then do argument and finish it up then. Fair? Okay.
Will likely be in a different court for the condition.
Yes, likely be in a different court.
Let's have it confirm the location.
All right, so you'll get the location from Mr. O'Connor and make sure Mr. Knight. All right, anything further from either side? You can step down.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further from the state? No. Anything further from the defense? All right, court will be in recess then.
All right. Live in recess. Maybe
This goes to him, this is not mine, so I'll take it.
You have 2 seconds, I think. One of the pictures and that.